So, hello and welcome to this first session of our little lighting academy community thingy. Um, Before we get things started, I just want to say a few words. First of all, very, very big thanks to Sarah Lee Wokström. She was so kind to provide an environment for this session. Um, I She also made like a couple of guides for me so I can better understand what this is about, which is actually very, very important. So I got like infos and descriptions from her where she's telling me kind of like what she wants to achieve with the scene, what's her reference for the scene, things like that. Very, very important for me to understand what people are actually trying to achieve when they work on their scenes, as this has really, really big influences on how we're gonna set up the scenes. Um, I just had a very brief look at the stuff that she's made so far, just so I kind of like know in which direction we need to go. And while I had a look at those shots and the info she provided, I thought it might actually be the best if we split this first session into multiple parts, let's call it that, um, because I think it's very important to talk about different components, and it's actually the scene is rather complex in terms of how she's built it, and like she has a couple of levels with different lighting setups where she tried different things, and I think it would be best to split those up. Also, I would like to actually provide videos fairly quickly, so instead of like doing a super huge session where I go through all of the stuff that I could potentially say, and it takes me like 2 weeks to make the videos, and then it's going to be like a 4-hour video. I think it's actually better if I try to put videos out with a little bit of higher frequency, and yeah, talking about different aspects of how I approach optimizing certain things of the scene. So one very, very important thing before we get started, what I'm about to say, it's really, it's my experience. It's how I would tackle certain things. So please take everything that I say with a grain of salt, because there might be many, many different situations where things just apply in a different way, or where you know, other rules could potentially apply. So it's really it's the way I do it. But obviously there's many, many ways of doing things. So yeah, don't consider this to be set in stone. So yeah, that's just important to know, I think. One thing that I think is important as well is I I try to go in as unprepared as I possibly can. Um, that has a reason. So the thing is, like when I watch tutorials to learn what I'm doing, or learn things that I'm like not yet sure how to do them, it's I don't like when people don't have problems, because if you, for example, you make a modeling tutorial and you have tons of curved surfaces where you have to cut holes in, and if you basically model the thing before doing the tutorial, and then you're gonna model it again, you you already solved many problems where people might be struggling and they don't even know that you were at the same point as they were, where you were like struggling because you didn't know how to solve a problem. And I think that's not really helpful. So what I'm trying to do is basically come in super fresh, and I might actually struggle often when I do certain things, because I don't know yet how I would actually solve the problem, or you know, work with some things that are not working out the way I actually want them to be. So I think it's really important that you guys actually see how I make mistakes and how I basically solve my problems. I think this is a huge part of learning how to become better, and it also kind of shows like even I do have some experience in what I do. I'm by no means, like I make mistakes as well. I still sometimes I'm supposed to make a certain lighting condition and I'm sitting there like, oh my God, like how do I fucking make this happen? I have no idea. So I think it's a very, very important aspect of learning how to improve to actually run into those situations and then see how certain problems can be solved. So with that said, um, so I got the scene from Sarah Lee. She's a student at the Future Games Academy, or like Future Games here in Stockholm. And I got a couple of screenshots from her, so I want to show them to you. So this is what she has right now. So a couple of different camera angles here. We have a day setting and we have a night setting. And this actually already looks fairly good, I would say. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot of things that we can do when it comes to the lighting and the mood. But I also think there's actually already many good things happening here. So there's a couple of fog sheets, there's like some atmosphere, we got a little bit of depth of field and things like that. So she was already aware of like, hey, I need some volumetrics to spice up the environment as well, which is actually quite good. Um, However, the most interesting thing for me is actually her description. So let's, yeah, get this. Um, so what she is writing here is that she was very much like the inspiration for this project actually came from the paintings from Simon Stalenhag. And I don't know if you guys know Simon Stalenhag. It's not a problem if you don't, but definitely check him out. I think it's one of the most interesting digital painters. It's a very distinct style. It's extremely stylish. Like, let's show you the references. I I love those pictures. Like this guy, the way he paints stuff, the kind of like realism, how he combines realism with like this otherworldly look. My opinion, very, very, very great artist. Extremely cool pictures. So just to show some of them, they're fairly small, but like you can check out all his pictures in like super large on his website. It's always like this kind of northern Swedish landscape. You got like a couple of old cars and like worn down buildings, and then you have like always these weird sci-fi influences. Like as you can see here, you got like an old car, the old gas station, then you got like these super modern sci-fi, almost alien looking like things like vehicles, buildings, spaceships, whatever. Here again, here we those are actually the daylight references that she showed me. We got like many paintings like this where it's like very, very moody afternoon or even nighttime lighting. This is like mostly, I mean, it's Sweden, right? So in Sweden, when it's like winter, it gets dark around 3, or let's say the sunset is around 3. So this is basically 3:30 or something like that. That's how it looks here, lighting wise. Um, so one very, very important thing is like how I tackle my lighting. I basically I have two main pillars that I always try to take care of when I do my lighting. So pillar one is technology. Pillar two is um, artistic knowledge, or yeah, I think that's the way how you can say it. Because I think like as a lighting artist or working with lighting in digital environments like video games and whatever, Um, the technical stuff, it's mostly only a tool, right? So it's like the brush that the painter uses. However, it's like you really need to understand how the technology works to make the best use of it, to be able to like use the best approach for a given situation, like so you get basically most bang for the buck. It's super, super, super important. On the other side, you also need a great amount of artistic knowledge because you need to understand artistically what you're trying to achieve. You need to have knowledge about composition, you need knowledge about colors, about contrast, value. So I can really recommend for anyone to just like study art, look at pictures, photography, paintings, composition, but also like be aware of what the technology can do. I mean, I will go through a couple of things when we look at the scene in Unreal. Um, and like sometimes it can just help if you're unhappy with like how something looks and you're like, oh man, how can I achieve that? You might not know, but then there's actually a technical feature that allows you to make, at least in that spot, make something specific happen the way you want it. So it's really about the marriage of technology and yeah, artistic knowledge or training. So if we just go back to these shots here, and if we look at those shots, like they work already quite well. However, I would say if we basically, well, let's not take this shot. Yeah, mm, this shot or this shot maybe. If we compare this shot against this shot, I think it's starting to become clear what the difference is. And I'm super thankful that Sarah Lee chose Simon Stalenhag because he has such um, a unique and also such a clear style of how he does things. I think it's super cool to analyze what he's doing and why does it look the way it does, and then apply that knowledge to what we actually see in Unreal. And this is something that I really want to push in general. If you have something where you have a reference for it, like let's say you're working in a team on a game and you get like concepts from a concept artist of your team or like from whomever, it doesn't matter, but you get some nice reference. And the goal is to really achieve the look of that reference. Then it's like it's super important knowledge if you know how you can analyze that reference and transfer the key components of that reference image over into your final artwork. So I would love to start with that topic for this first session today, where we basically go through the reference and we trying to nail down what makes the reference look like it does. And then we will have a look at Sara Lee's scene and we will um, try figuring out what's actually missing or what's not matching to get to that look of the reference. So I'm gonna bring up those paintings again first. I think that for the first session we will start with the night stuff. So the daylight stuff, I think we're gonna tackle that in one of the next videos. So if we just take those paintings, let's open them up in Photoshop so we can draw on them if necessary. Just give me a second. So we got this, and let's open the others as well. Yeah. So, first of all, I apologize. I don't have my graphics tablet hooked up, so my lines are gonna be horribly bad since I'm drawing with the mouse. But it doesn't really matter. It's just for illustrative purpose. So if we start looking at all these images here, the first thing that we can see is that it's actually quite a muted color palette. So if I'm just like going to go in here, let's bam, 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 that's cool. So if I'm just going to pick some of those colors and open them up, we can see like we're not very saturated, like we're not over here, so we can see it's like already fairly saturated, desaturated, and it's also fairly dark. If we pick the concrete color over here, same thing. I mean, obviously it's gray, so it's not that saturated, but if we're gonna pick this red color here, also same thing again, we are very, very desaturated. And we can do that basically for all the pictures. We can go in here, we get the tree, very desaturated. We can pick the house, again, very desaturated. We can pick the robot, very desaturated. And that's like really, that's a theme that goes through all of his pictures. So first of all, the pictures are fairly flat color-wise. However, and this is like one of the significant skills of Stalin Haag, I believe, is like even though he's using quite a flat color scheme, he actually makes it happen that all those pictures, they look very, very interesting and very inviting and strange, but on the other hand, they are able to like communicate some emotion. And my belief is, just when you analyze these images, is that he does that via contrast. And I think that he likes two forms of contrast. So the first form of contrast, we can see it very nicely here. The first form of contrast that Simon likes is the contrast of dark against bright. So let's just get rid of the colors here and do a black and white layer. So you can see that we have a fairly bright sky and some very dark structures in here, actually like going out into the sky and creating interesting shapes of contrast. We basically have that in almost every picture, so it doesn't really matter. Like even if I go in here, you can see we got like these people here doing their thing. Let's choose another color here. So we got these people sticking out here. We got like he's throwing that kind of like spear. We also have like the ships here. They blend actually quite well into the background, but we also have this contrast line going through the image, and we have the fence as well. And the fence is actually very important because it leads the eye towards those guys that are throwing the spear, most likely towards these spaceship drone thingies or whatever they are. If we look here, let's just do the black and white thing again, we can see that this guy really stands out. Like he is just very much in focus. And those ships here, they're there as well, and they're also nicely separated. And then we got like these elements here, dark ones in the corners that are like framing the image. So this is like the first type of contrast that Simon basically uses in every picture. Like here we have the same, right? Like we got these guys and they're so much darker than the surroundings. If we go to this image as well, like this is a huge item of contrast, these like snowmobiles and of course the guys here. If we look here, same thing again, we got like this item of contrast basically. If we go here, we have this item of contrast, we have the tree framing the thing, and we have this house here generating contrast. So basically, that's the first element of contrast that he uses. If we deactivate the black and white layers again, and we just like look at the colors again, there is also, well, nice, I just painted on this. There's also a second element of contrast that makes his images work the way they do, and that is warm-cold. So you can always see that here in the sky, here we get the warmth contrasting with the artificial light source. Very important, it's an artificial light source here, casting something that is actually right in between something warm and cold. This picture, we got we got very, very warm light sources coming from the windows. We got a couple of warm light sources coming from down here, in contrast to the very cold light sources here and the overall very cold color of the image. Next up here as well, we got like the only really warm color here is like again the sunset in the background. We got a couple of lights on those drones. Here it's less of warm cold, but we do have those yellow lights and we have the red light at the top of here. This one is a perfect example of warm cold contrast. And here we again, like Simon really likes doing these illuminated windows that like deliver this kind of feeling of like, oh, this is a cozy place. I'm like coming from the outdoor. It's super fucking cold and this is the place I want to be. They got like a fireplace and like some you know, nice couches, and it's got to be a nice place. Same for this one here, where it almost seems like the robot is coming from the cold outside and he wants to go here where it's warm and nice and hang out with the people. And here again, very classic warm-cold contrast. So I think it is very key to understand what we are trying to achieve is that we need three things. We need a fairly muted palette for the whole image, and then we actually go for dark bright contrast and we go for warm cold contrast. So those are more or less the key pillars of achieving that style. And it's also fairly interesting if you like analyze his pictures. If we just look at this, so like right here, if I just pick that snow color and I go in here, so we can see that it's fairly bright. It's like brightness 85. But like most of those colors, they are in that range of like, I would say 50 to 85. But then we always in every image have almost full black and almost full white. So even though if everything is like kind of a muted palette, there is this guy and his jacket is really dark. So if we go in here, we have a brightness of 22. And if we go into the highlight spot of that lamp and we just sample it, we get like basically 99. And that is really, really important. It's every picture has that. We can see this again, very muted, very flat colors. Like look at the house. There is not a lot of contrast, but then if we look at this window on the door or the bumper of the car or the trousers of this guy, it's very dark. It's 16. And if we just go in here where the lights are on that ship, it's 97. So as you can see, there is this pattern of we do have very bright, almost white spots. We have some almost black spots, and everything else in between is fairly muted palette-wise. So that's extremely important when you're trying to go for a certain look and you're like really trying to resemble that look. So let's have a look at the scene in Unreal. I also want to say I have two monitors, so like sometimes I do things off the screen, but those are mainly things that are not that important, like opening up a map or something. I try to really move the stuff on the screen where I'm recording when I'm doing important things. Mostly, however, though, I have this panel on my right screen which has the details and the world settings. But I think I'm gonna do this for these sessions so we can actually kind of like look at that stuff. So let me open up the map. Also, one thing that I want to say, I'm doing this for the first time, so please, if you have any feedback or if you want me to do this or not to do that, then please comment because it's meant for you and I'm really trying to help all of you guys with this. So if you would like to see certain things or if you would like me to do things differently or, you know, just please share your feedback so I know what's appreciated and what's not. So this is the first scene. Um, I actually haven't fully understood what's all the difference between the scenes, but this is the main scene that she's been working with. I also want to say one important thing here. She has different lighting settings in different streaming levels. This is, I think if she used what I think she did, that's a new feature of 4.14 where you can actually have different static lighting bakes in different sub-levels, so you can like change that and all the light maps they get saved in those levels. Um, I haven't worked with that feature yet. So my main engine version is still like 4.13. That's where I'm working for my personal projects. Like I mostly don't update every version. I tend to update every second version. Also, my private projects. I'm running a Perforce server with like some friends, and so it's a bit tricky to update engine builds there, especially since I have very slow internet. So please forgive me. I will not take into account this new feature of switching those lighting settings. Maybe I will tackle it in one of the later videos as soon as I really had a look at that, how it actually really works and what you need to be careful with. So bear in mind, for now I will only work with the light dusk setting. Um, so yeah, um, that's the scene. And what's interesting to me is first I want to find out what is actually going on here. So what I do is I look at the different components, how they are set up and what they are doing. So we can see we have a movable skylight here with the custom cube map, and we have a movable directional light as well. And we do have a couple of fill lights flowing around here and they seem to be all set to movable. So yeah, case is fairly clear. The scene is lit fully dynamic. Um, Now we're actually already at a topic that is almost like every time it's a very, very heated discussion because some people say like, oh no, you know, like dynamic lighting sucks because you don't have global illumination. Others are like, yeah, well, it doesn't really matter so much, but it's easy to iterate. Um, my experience is, of course, static lighting looks superior. We do have light mask global illumination, so my opinion is if you can use static lighting, you should always do it. because the quality that you can get out of it is way superior to what you can get with dynamic lighting. However, there are use cases where it's just not feasible and it's too expensive, or it's causing problems and visual glitches and extreme baking times, like things like that. And then it's of course no problem at all to do everything with dynamic lighting. Also, if you say like, hey, I have a more stylized look or something like that, I don't need global illumination that has very precise color bounds. It's totally good to do dynamic lighting. Um, there's also some tricks to make dynamic lighting look less like the typical things that you get with dynamic lighting. And there are also some hacks and engine tricks that you can enable to make certain things happen. So um, let's just start quickly by analyzing the scene a little bit more. So we have like a sunlight coming from over here, which is kind of like our light coming from the moon. Um, the trees look fairly shadowed. That tells me that we're most likely using distance field ambient occlusion. So if we can go to the skylight and we just disable cast shadows, yep, here we can see it. We're using distance field ambient occlusion. Um, so out of the box, this is actually a very good setup. Um, However, we can see that we have some problems value-wise. Also, that scene is not very big. So if we just look at it like this, we can see it's a super small scene. And I got the description from Sarali, and in the description it said that she has shots. So we got like shortcuts like 1, 2, 3, 4. And what I like to do, and this is kind of like a suggestion, when I work on a scene like this, where I'm not going to show the scene, but I'm only having static shots, um, I fake a lot more than I would normally fake, because it's not an environment where the player is supposed to walk through. So you can do all sorts of things, like for example, hey, see that barrel here? It's like, it looks a bit boring. Maybe like add a light from here to give like a highlight on the side. I like these custom things to make stuff pop. I do them a lot more if I have fixed camera angles. But if this is gonna be like a scene that is like, let's imagine this is a landscape of like 4 square kilometers, and in one corner of the landscape we got this house, then I wouldn't do these things, because then I want it to be like a explorable area. And if you have tons of fake lights, they can cause different problems as well, like, you know, bleed over onto characters or other things. A second thing that I want to say is, like, if we have a scene like that that is fairly small, we can actually use static lighting for that, because static lighting and lush foliage and trees and grass, and like we have here, it's always tricky to do that with static lighting because of the light maps. The trees are fairly dense, so we might run into issues with like the light map texture sizes and all these things. However, if we just have a small scene like that, I would actually say that, you know what, it doesn't really fucking matter, because we can just crank those resolutions up on those couple of trees, and yeah, on final quality it will maybe take an hour to build it, but it's like nothing compared to the quality that you can get out of it. Also, there are a couple of ways to cheat. So I'm gonna talk about these as well. So, I think for now we're gonna do it with dynamic lighting first, and we're gonna talk about static lighting maybe in the end of this video, or we're gonna look at static lighting with one of the next videos. So one thing that I can already notice is when I'm like moving around here, I'm getting like depth of field and stuff like that. So I am going to look into the post-process volume, and I'm actually gonna reset everything. Whoops. Zack. Because, as you can already see, she chose a white balance change for the scene to... Why the hell is this? That makes no sense. It's not really Kelvin, but okay, interesting. Yeah, as you can see, we can quickly change the mood of the scene with that. However, there are many approaches of making something look like night. So I want to start with a clean base, so I'm really going in here and I'm gonna turn all of that stuff off so I see what's going on and how does the scene actually look like without anything. Tack, here we got all that stuff. Bloom has also some changes. Okay, we just gonna reset the auto exposure as well. So this is really like, I'm gonna start with the out-of-the-box result that you get in Unreal, and then we're gonna work our way towards something that hopefully resembles the stuff from Simon a little bit more closely. One important thing, that global illumination slider, it actually only multiplies the intensity of the light maps, so if you're using dynamic lighting, that absolutely has no effect. I turn off the depth of field because I actually don't really like it. Let me talk about one feature very quickly, Ambient Cube map in the post-process volume. My suggestion, never use that. Again, like, take everything that I say with a grain of salt, but in my experience, never used it. I actually know a couple of guys working for Epic, and I'm also kind of friends a little bit with Daniel Wright from Epic, and we talked about these things quite often when I was still working at Jaeger with Unreal. And so the official kind of like statement from Epic is that this is a feature that was used before they had the skylight. And it's basically doing the same thing as the skylight, however it is not shadowed. It's just applied in post over everything. So it will make your interiors go blue, or like, of course depending on what kind of like cube map you put in here, but it basically, it bleeds through everything. You can occasionally use it for some fakeria magic stuff, but in general I suggest don't use it, use the skylight instead. Auto exposure, lens flare, that's good. We can just stick to the defaults here. Yes. Okay. So, this is what we have as a default, right? Excuse me. So, we can see that this is by no means really a nighttime setting, but it helps us to see what kind of like colors do we have here. And actually, if I look at this, it already is very, very close to the color palette that we actually see on Simon's images. So if I just gonna bring that back up and we're gonna look at some of these images, we can see that like these muted colors, they already match very, very nicely. So that is actually really good. We can of course also verify that if we go into the buffer visualizations and we go for base color. Then we can see that it's actually fairly saturated in certain cases. So if we just look at these colors here, I think we want that house to really pop, which is the reason it is fairly saturated, I would assume now. I think that this cool little sci-fi ball here actually has the better values. the trees, they are really fucking saturated. Um, there's actually something we can have a look at. Let's see if it helps us. If you go into Show and Developer, we have the G-buffer hints. If we turn that on, it shows yellow and red. So yellow is unrealistic material. In nature, even black materials reflect quite some light. So that says if it's yellow, it is too dark from the diffuse value. Red is impossible material. That means this material emits more light than it receives, and that is basically if it's too saturated. So if we just take a look at this, this is all not being flagged right now. You would see that because it basically overlays colors, like it overlays like a raster. But this is interesting now. Let me quickly switch back to lit. Is that actually metallic here? Let's see our metallic buffer. Nope. Okay, so that is interesting because I think this material here, the black tube, it should definitely be flagged as red. Not as red, as yellow in the base color view mode. So it kind of like feels a little bit like maybe those view modes are not supported anymore, or maybe they are broken. Actually, that happens fairly often. I mean, I'm really not trying to diss Epic here, but it's actually, in my experience, it's not the first time that some of these things don't work the way as they used to work in the past. So like this one is way too dark. This is so fucking dark. This is basically Vanta black. You should actually never have Vanta black in your scene. So yeah, normally that's a pretty cool view mode to help you. It's found on the developer G-buffer hints. So so if we look back at that, let's see what else we have in the scene. I think we have an exponential height fog, yes. So if we're just gonna deactivate that, yup, it's only doing this stuff here. The trees actually don't look too bad in lit mode, so that is okay. Even with the fog, that helps quite a bit. The thing is just like what you want is if you go into if you go into the base color, you want something that actually looks fairly flat, because the range is later gonna come from the lighting and the post-processing. There is a super interesting article. It's let me see. I think it is this one. Yes, this one. So that is something that I think everyone should check out, because normally, like I tell you, like we even have these problems at DICE. So it's like people just using too strong values, too much contrast in the textures. So when you look at these two pictures here, that's how it looks lit, right? So that's with all the lighting applied. And then this is what it looks unlit. And what you can see is that these images, excuse me, they're really, really, really flat. There's not a lot of detail. So if I'm just gonna pick this here and let's just do this and copy it and go into Photoshop. Jesus, yeah. Why is my Photoshop German again? That sucks. Alright, so if we just take this one and we go to... Damn. They just changed all of that stuff. Yeah, so I'm going to blur and average. Sorry, I need to swap my language again for Photoshop. I just updated to 2017 and now everything is in German again. Sorry for that, gonna fix it for the next video. So this is blur average, and if we pick that color we can see that we are, brightness-wise, we are on 69. That is fairly bright. That is way above medium gray. So let's take the second shot here. Zack. Rip. And we're gonna go to average again, and we pick it. That is a lot darker. That's 31. However, the interesting thing here is all those values, they are still fairly close to each other. If we look at this, you can see it paints a totally different picture. So if I'm just gonna grab this and put it into Photoshop as well, alright, so I'm going to add a hue saturation layer, and I'm going to, you can see how I'm desaturating it, right? This is minus 30. So it was like this before, and that's it with minus 30. This is actually a lot closer to what we see here value-wise than our initial setup of this is like. That's why I said that the color of the sci-fi ball here are actually a lot better because they're not as oversaturated. So this is really important to just to remember. Sometimes you want to really go for that super poppy cartoony style, like Overwatch for example. Then you can do that. But if you're aiming for a more realistic style, you should not oversaturate your textures. And since we talked about Simon Stalenhag, it's very muted palette, we should actually, well, go less saturated than what this is. However, since I'm not going to rework the textures now, we're just going to stick with this. And so what we'll do now is we will first of all lay out some quick foundations for our scene. Let's look at those images again quickly. Let's look at the skies. So what we can see is they are either like sunset, slightly like that, like afternoon sunset, and they're mostly blue, but they're not always blue because it's the sky and like just the plain sky, but they're mostly they are sometimes cloudy, but it's very blurry, cloudy, overcast thingy. It's hard to describe, but you actually have that quite often here in Sweden, where it is cloudy, but it's kind of like so bright that it still looks like it's the actual sky, even though it is clouds. But they're not like nice and puffy clouds, right? So what we have here is we have the default sky dome from Epic, and what I wonder is the light is coming from here and we got like a sun disk flying around over here. That tells me that something is not hooked up correctly. So we're gonna check the sky sphere, and we can already see that the directional light is not hooked up. So what we want to do is we want to hook up the directional light, and so we can now see that the sun/moon actually matches. So now what we can do is, this is the sun brightness of the sun disk that is being rendered. It has absolutely no influence on the directional light itself. So the directional light settings, whoops, that's the skylight, they're still going to be changed in the directional light, right? If we check this, we get this, right? So we do get this kind of like nice red glow here, and we do get a lot of blue still here. And I think Sara Lee unchecked that because she didn't want to have so much of that purple color here. However, we can see that it generates a slight fuck up with the clouds here. So the clouds are slightly pinkish in a very, very weird way, and we actually don't want that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the colors determined by sun position just to kind of like make sure that it doesn't break as much as it does right now. Um, that's the first thing that I'm doing. Actually, what I do suggest for a situation like this is make yourself a custom sky dome. So basically go to one of the websites for HDR images and download a nice sky that resembles the reference closer, like something fairly um, blue and like cold looking, but where there is a little bit of sun in the background. Actually, I think we're gonna do this because I think if you lay down your foundations in a very good way, it really, really helps achieving the results in a better way than just trying to make something work that is not really good from the beginning. So I know that I have tons of HDR images over here, and I also know that I had a sky like this that would actually work very, very, very well with this kind of setting, because this is really the sun position that we would kind of need for a setting like this. Also, if we look at all these references here, we never really see the sun. So I'm actually very close to thinking, you know what, maybe we don't really need any sunlight at all. But we'll see. That's something that we will find out while working with the scene. So now I will also actually show you a couple of tricks. So first of all, where's Unreal? Let's keep this thing here for now, just quickly. If we go into the Skyline, you can see right now Sarah is using, I hope it's okay if I call you Sarah. Right now she's using this HDR image, so she's not capturing the sky, but she's using this image here, which looks like this. I have honestly no idea what that is. It seems to be not really matching here with the projections, and there's like tons of weird stuff in here. So I'm like, ugh, what's that? I don't want to use it. So first thing I'm gonna do is I switch back to captured scene. And now you can see that already did quite some changes. So that's what we had before. That's what we have now. Totally different values, different contrasts, and that's just because we're now capturing the actual sky. There is a very interesting value in here. If you know what the skylight does, the skylight captures the sky, and it has this super huge value in here, which is called the sky distance threshold. To illustrate what that does, we need to go into the reflections view mode, and that looks rather interesting. Why does it look like that? Din, 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 din. Can we actually... Ah, oh, damn it. Yeah, sometimes these view modes also like to fuck up. Din, 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 din. Why am I not getting the stuff that I want? Let's switch to this. Okay. This is actually this is an issue that I've encountered multiple times, and I only encounter that issue when using fully dynamic lighting. I never had that issue when I use static lighting. So it's fairly hard to illustrate right now. I will try to explain it. So basically what happens is you have the sky distance threshold, right? And that basically disregards everything that we can see here in that landscape, and it only captures really this sky dome. So we only get a capture of the plain sky without anything else. What happens is you can see we have this blue well, color here below the horizon. And what happens is if I capture the scene's lighting and I turn off the lower hemisphere is black, do you see what happens? It basically, what it does is, imagine everything that is blue will light the scene from below with blue. And if you capture the skylight like that, you don't want the scene to be blue from below. That's why you can basically fill this color with black, so to say, and that kind of kills off the lighting that comes from below. As we can see here, it like helps to shadow things. However, it also does something else. It has the reflections in there as well. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find well, we don't have any objects here. No. Okay, let's try it like this. We just take that cube and put it into the scene. Zip. Well, we make it a bit larger, and those are some distance field fuck-ups that we're getting right now. And I'm just making, oh wait, well, is that the cube material? Yes. Okay, just gonna open up that cube material and whoops, I'm gonna put in metallic 1. I'm gonna put the roughness to 0, so we get this. So what that skylight also does is it provides the reflections from the sky for the scene. And as you can see right now, let me quickly deactivate the distance fields on that cube. In case you were wondering how you can deactivate the distance field for an object specifically, you can go to the build settings, and there you got the distance field resolution scale. If you set that value to 0 and hit apply changes, can you see? The object loses its distance field. That is very important if you have like things bugging out like we just saw, or you want to save performance on certain assets and you don't want that they use the distance field. So now we can see our cube, right? Okay. Now we're gonna search for reflection capture actor, and there is one, and the radius is fairly big, and that is the reason why we can see trees. So I'm gonna turn the capture off. Just do it like this. Okay, so now you can see what is happening here if we go into the skylight. And so the lower hemisphere is filled with black, so we don't get all that weird lighting and reflection from below. So if you're gonna turn that off, you see this happens. We get the full sky. Now comes something interesting. When you use an HDR image like this, there is a ground color. So if you're using an HDR image, I will always suggest deactivating that lower hemisphere solid color black option, because if you take an HDR image that has like grass fields in the bottom, you potentially get like some fake GI from below that is green. And that is what you want, because you're using dynamic lighting, so you can't bake the bounce from the terrain onto the objects. But what you can do is you can use the cube map to kind of like fake bounce. And there's also this new feature of like changing this color. Last time I tried it, it didn't work. Now it seems to actually do work, which is nice. So what we can potentially do is we can just go in here, take our snipping tool, take this, copy paste it into Photoshop. Let's use here and scale it up. Perfect. And now we can again blur it with average, and now we got this color that we can use. So if we go back to Unreal and we pick the Skyline color, we can actually choose the sRGB value because we picked it from Photoshop, and that is this value. And now you can see that like now we get this value from below, which actually is exactly our grass color. Of course I actually did it wrong right now, because what you would do is you want to do this. You want to sample this color instead. I think there is a color picker, so we can just do it like this, but you can see how the colors vary. That's why I did the average thing, because I want to get an average of that grass, but we're just going to pick this now. So that should be fine. And now if we go back, we actually have this color from below, and you can see what it does, right? It helps us getting the shadowing from below, but we also get a better representation of the color. Here you can see that it actually is slightly green, and depending on what colors, you can see how we actually are able to generate like a fake bounce coming from below, from the landscape. So if you really want to get into that green, kind of like maybe a more kind of like this maybe, or whatever, you can really see, okay, now we do get this nice fake green bounce from below that really helps setting this up. So what we actually can do now is we can still we can use the HDR image in here, or we can just like fake around a little bit with those colors. So what we're gonna do now is we gonna close all that stuff. Nope. Damn, too many pictures. Nope. Alright, so the problem is I don't have a CG Skies account, and I also I just downloaded this freebie, right? So this is not the full resolution image. It's actually fairly low resolution. However, if we look at those skies, it doesn't matter so much. And right now this is really for illustrative purposes. So what I like to do is, I don't like that black stuff here. So what I normally do is I duplicate the layer, and then oh man, I'm so not used to German Photoshop anymore. Boop. Then I mirror it vertically, and then I just cut that stuff out. Okay, and accidentally I did mirror the bottom image as well. Damn, why is it doing that shit to me? Okay, so I got this one, I got this one, and then I'm gonna... What the hell? Okay, give me a second. I'll start fresh all over. It like somehow did fuck up my layers. Okay, so zack. Bip, 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 bip. Okay, this is the weirdest. Ah, yeah, I'm stupid. I totally used the wrong tool. I mirrored my image instead of that layer. Yeah, it's getting late. Alright. So now I have this image. Then what I also do is in the bottom one, I tend to paint out the sun because it's not super helpful to have it in here. So that's okay. Now we're just gonna save it somewhere. Bam, 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 bam. I'll just put it in here. Oops. All right. I'll just make a new folder, sky, and I'm gonna import that image. So now we have to do a couple of important things. So first of all, we have to set no mipmaps, which it already did. And that is, oh yeah, shit, that happens automatically if you don't have a power of 2 image. So we don't have to worry about that. That's great. Then we have to go in here and we have to use vector displacement map. Vector displacement map means that this is a raw image. It doesn't get compressed or anything like that. We want that because this is going to be our sky, and we really want that to look as sharp as we can get it. Alright. Yeah, let's save that. Doesn't matter. And now what we also want to do is if we go to the view options in our content browser, we want to show engine content. Because in engine content there are a couple of things that we can use that are fairly sweet to use. Let's say it like this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to click the BP sky sphere, gonna delete it, so I get this one. And the next thing that I'm gonna do is I go into the engine content, I activate the filter static mesh, and I'm gonna type in sphere, and then we got the editor sphere. I'm just gonna drag that one in here. Alright, let's move it to here, and I'm gonna make sure that my editor sphere has no distance fields enabled. Distance field resolution is 0, please. Apply. Thank you. Alright. Okay. Now I make a new material folder which I call sky, and I'm gonna make a new material. I call it sky master. Alright, so first thing we're gonna do is we gonna set it to unlit, and we gonna get our sky texture in here. just gonna use this for now. Hit apply. We most likely need to flip it, but we will see what we get. So I'm gonna drag this on my sphere. Okay, we don't need to actually flip it, but one important thing that we need to do is